All right, I think that it's a good time to make a start. All right, hello everyone and welcome to this NELI programme webinar. My name is Sarah Hearn and I work as part of the NELI team at Oxford and Assessment, and I'm looking forward to talking you through a deep dive into LanguageScreen today. So I'll be kicking off with a poll in a moment to find out a little bit more about why you're all here today. But I imagine that we've got some people who've used LanguageScreen before and you're just sort of looking to improve your understanding and maybe find out if there's anything new that you need to know. Whilst there might be others of you who've never used LanguageScreen and you're really just wanting to find out a little bit more about what it's all about. But hopefully, regardless of sort of which camp you fall into, there's going to be something that's useful for you today. I should say that I'm also really delighted to be joined on the panel today by Matthew Lindars, who has been using both LanguageScreen and NELI in his school, St Michael's Primary in Oxford, for the last 4 years. And he will be sharing his experiences a little bit later on. So welcome, Matthew. Maybe if you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself and your role at St Michael's.
Hi Sarah and hi everybody. My name is Matthew. I am the acting deputy head teacher at St Michael's, as well as the early years lead, the phonics lead, and the maths lead.
Fantastic. All right, so just before we get going, here's what you can expect from the session. So we're going to be here for about 40 minutes, and I'll spend the first 25 minutes or so covering kind of the main topics of the webinar, and then I'll do a bit of a Q&A with Matthew. And I have tried to make sure that I've covered off all of the kind of questions that you guys submitted into the registration form, but as always, if you have any questions as we go, then please do pop them into the Q&A, and we've got Kevin from our support team on hand to help. So everyone's cameras and microphones are automatically set to off, and the webinar is being recorded so that we can share it with anyone who wasn't able to attend. Okay, so I will start off with a poll to get to know the group a little bit better. And then while the results come in, I'll just run you through the agenda. So hopefully in a moment, a poll will flash up onto you guys' screens. So hopefully you can see that now. And there's just a couple of questions about your LanguageScreen use and what you're hoping to get out of today's session. Okay. So yeah, I can see answers coming in, so hopefully that means it's worked. I'll minimize that for a moment. So while those come in, I'll just quickly run you through the agenda. So I'm going to start off with a bit of an overview about what LanguageScreen is, how it works. Then I'll talk a little bit about the evidence that has gone into the development of LanguageScreen and why we think it's a fantastic tool for your school to be using. Then I'll do a bit of a deeper dive into kind of what's actually being assessed in a LanguageScreen assessment and how you can understand the report that you end up with after an assessment. Then we'll go into a little bit more detail about, once you've got those reports, how you can use the information within them to kind of measure and monitor your children's progress over the years. And I'll just wrap up with a few words on how to kind of get up and running with LanguageScreen if you haven't already. I know that lots of you will be really familiar with it, but if we've got any newbies on the call, then hopefully that will be helpful for you. And then, as I said, for the last sort of 15 minutes or so, I'll be chatting with Matthew about his experiences of using LanguageScreen and NELI in his school. Okay, so let me see if I can pull up these poll results. Okay, I'll just end that and hopefully I can share the results there. Okay, so hopefully they're flashing up on your screen now. So this is interesting. So we've got lots of people, 60% of people are already using LanguageScreen and want to learn more about it. So that is absolutely fantastic. It's really great to hear that even though you're kind of already familiar with the tool, you're kind of keen to learn more. And then there are a few people who don't currently use it. but are planning on using it either instead of or in addition to something that they're already doing. That's great. And in terms of what you're interested in learning today, so lots and lots of you are wanting, obviously, to learn how to use it to identify children for intervention, of course, and tracking children's language skills over time. So that's fantastic. But a fair amount of you also interested in the evidence, how to create a report, and carrying out an assessment. So we have covered off all of those points, or we will be covering off all of those points in the course of today. So hopefully there'll be something for everyone today. I'll close that down. Okay, so what is LanguageScreen? Well, it is an assessment tool which helps schools to track the progress of children's oral language skills and also to identify those who would benefit most from interventions or even more sort of specialist support. So how does it work? Well, LanguageScreen assessments are administered individually. So that means one child per one adult for each assessment. And it's done using a mobile device, such as a phone or a tablet. Now, I should say that we do have a web version of the assessment in development, and we actually expect to be able to release this by the end of this month. It's really exciting, and what this will mean is that you will be able to carry out your assessments on a laptop or a computer instead of a tablet, which we know will be really helpful if you are sort of, if you don't have those resources in the school, or if you're kind of sharing in between, and it, you know, it can be a bit tricky sometimes. So hopefully that will be really helpful in those situations. So in terms of timings, each LanguageScreen assessment takes between 5 and 12 minutes, and that's from start to finish. So there's no additional kind of time required for scoring or data entry, because that's all done automatically. Now, the reason that there is a bit of variation in the kind of testing time for the assessment is that the test adapts to the age and the abilities of the child that's being tested. So what I mean by that is that it's shorter for younger children or for children who have kind of weaker language skills. And I will talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But sort of in terms of real terms of how long the assessment takes, if you're assessing full time, so I'm kind of thinking, so I've done lots of LanguageScreen assessments as part of the research trials behind NELI. And when I've gone into a school and that's been the only thing I'm doing, I can get through a class of children in sort of a day or just over a day. Now, obviously, I know that's not going to be the scenario that you guys are in. You're often fitting this in around lots of other things that you're doing. But I think even in those scenarios, you're kind of looking at perhaps a week or maybe even 2 weeks if you're kind of really only sort of administering for a little bit of time each day. But it's really quick, and it's only got quicker than if you were using it sort of a year or two ago when the test was slightly longer. So due to its kind of adaptability, LanguageScreen is suitable for children aged 3 years all the way up to 11 years. So from nursery all the way up, right the way through to the end of primary school. And those of you who are familiar with the NELI intervention will know that this is sort of extended beyond the target age range for the NELI intervention. And that's because even though LanguageScreen is sort of part of the NELI programme and it can be used to, and we recommend that it's used to allocate children to receive the NELI intervention, it can actually be used on its own as well. So whether that's kind of in older year groups where NELI isn't quite so appropriate, or if you are, or it can be used in reception in year 1 if you are either not delivering NELI or sort of any language intervention, or if you're delivering another language intervention instead of NELI. So it can absolutely still be used to kind of assess children, allocate them to the language intervention, whether that's NELI or something else, and then track progress at the end of the year. And yes, as I said, so it can kind of be used right the way up through the school. And ideally, you would assess all children with LanguageScreen near the start and the end of each school year. So that first assessment is to kind of set a baseline and check who might need some additional targeted support. And the second assessment is to track progress and measure the impact of any targeted support that you're providing. Or even if you're not providing any targeted support in that particular year, it's still really interesting to see how the children's language skills might have progressed over the course of that time. And finally, there's no specialist sort of training required to use the assessment. Instructions are provided to the children within the app, and there's scoring guidance built in throughout to help the practitioner to kind of mark the child's responses. And I just wanted to show this. So if you are delivering the NELI intervention, this is how LanguageScreen would kind of fit into that delivery model. So you would be screening at the start of the year, usually in the autumn term, and then you would deliver your NELI intervention for 20 weeks, and then you would rescreen at the end of the year to be able to measure the impact of that programme. All right, so why use LanguageScreen? Why do we think it's so fantastic? Well, I mentioned earlier that LanguageScreen adapts to age and ability. So what does that sort of actually mean? Well, the LanguageScreen subtests and the questions that are asked in those subtests have been varied according to age. So when a child is assessed, they receive the version of the test which is most appropriate to them. Also, each subtest within LanguageScreen has been designed to sort of increase in difficulty, and there are rules built in so that once children reach the limits of their abilities, then that subtest ends and the app moves on to the next one. And because of this, it's sort of entirely expected that some children will answer some questions incorrectly. And that's absolutely fine. That's totally expected. That's really the only way that we'll kind of get to understand the limits of their capabilities. And all of this together is why LanguageScreen it's possible to use LanguageScreen to assess children all the way from age 3 to 11. And I just wanted to flag this because as a practitioner, you may have noticed some variation in the test from child to child. And just to reassure you, that's entirely expected. And it's how we're trying to ensure that the LanguageScreen experience is a positive one for all of the children. So, by making sure it's shorter and simpler for those who need it. Okay, and why else should you use LanguageScreen? Well, you will often hear us at Oxford, we talk about it a lot, say that LanguageScreen is objective, it's standardized, and it's validated. So what do all of these things mean and why does it matter? So in terms of objectivity, for accurate results of any test, it's really vital that a test is delivered in the same way and scored in the same way each time a child is assessed. And also that responses are marked either correct or incorrect using consistent guidelines. Now, tests which include more sort of observational, subjective components absolutely have their place, and they can provide really useful sort of holistic understanding of a child's abilities. But they can, and it's good to be aware of this, obviously, that they can also be open to bias. And our aim with LanguageScreen is to provide a quick but very accurate temperature test of a child's language abilities. And so for this reason, we provide as much support as possible to ensure that the test is administered objectively and in the same way every time. So just for example, there's a sort of an in-app voiceover which provides instructions to the children, and there's also scoring guidance provided throughout. So next comes standardized or standardization. So whereas a raw score, and by raw score, I just mean the real sort of a child got 8 out of 10 correct, that's their raw score. That tells you how well a child has scored in that particular test. Now, a standard score in comparison will tell you how a child has scored in comparison to a large group of children of the same age. Now, doing this standardization process and doing it properly requires a really large data set of assessments. And the bigger the data set, the more accurate and reliable that test is, that sort of standardized score that's provided. And LanguageScreen is standardized using over 500,000 assessments. In fact, we're over 600,000 assessments now, and that's only growing. The more assessments that are completed, the more data we can kind of add into that process. So you can be really confident that you're kind of getting absolutely the most accurate standard score as you can as part of that assessment. And finally, validation. So assessments that are sort of administered by speech and language therapists, these kind of really well-established assessments have been validated, and that means that they have evidence of being highly accurate at measuring children's language skills. Two of these sort of traditional assessments are called the KELF and the Renfrew Action Picture Test, or the RAPT for short. Now, in one of our NELI randomized control trials, speech and language specialists assessed children with these two traditional assessments, and school staff assessed those same children with LanguageScreen. And the results were compared, and it was found that they correlated almost perfectly. So they correlated at 0.95. So this is really, really important, because what we're showing here is that validated, well-established assessments carried out by trained experts, speech and language specialists, can produce the same level of accuracy, or the same sort of accurate results as a LanguageScreen assessment conducted by school staff. So it's kind of putting that sort of power into the hands of schools. So that's why we always talk about this. And I should say that we have published a paper now about the development, validation and standardization that went into LanguageScreen. So if you are interested in learning more about this, then please just scan the QR code on the slide at the moment, and that will take you to the research paper where we go into this in a lot more detail. Just leave that on the screen for one moment. Okay, so what is actually being tested in a LanguageScreen assessment? So there are 4 subtests: expressive vocabulary, listening comprehension, receptive vocabulary, and sentence repetition. So in the expressive vocabulary subtest, students see a series of pictures and they are asked to name them. And this task assesses the sort of extent of their vocabulary knowledge, so what words they know, and their ability to accurately use the right words. Any of you who've kind of used LanguageScreen, which it looks like lots of you have on the call today, might notice that it's really common for children, especially younger children, to come up with an answer and it's sort of a similar or an associated word. So for example, I see lots of children say chair instead of stool. And like I said, this is really common, and it's the reason that they do this is they're kind of their vocabulary is still growing. So they're kind of, if they don't have that specific word, they're kind of searching for the next best option. And that's what we're trying to kind of really pull out and highlight in these LanguageScreen assessments is that difference between kind of really knowing that specific, or having that specific vocabulary in your store, versus kind of having a simpler next best option. Now, then the next one is the listening comprehension, and in this task, children hear a series of short stories, and then they're asked both factual and inferential questions about each story. And this task assesses their ability to understand narratives and to effectively communicate that understanding back to the practitioner. And just as an example here of something that you might see, again, especially with younger children, is that they often start talking about their own experiences and their own feelings, rather than being able to talk about the character that they've just heard about in the story. And this is because their sort of understanding of the principles of storytelling is very much still developing. And again, that's a skill. That's something we're kind of trying to work on when we're doing our targeted work with the children. And it's what we're trying to pinpoint. We're trying to pinpoint their ability levels within that domain in a LanguageScreen assessment. So then next is receptive vocabulary, and in this task, children hear a word while being shown 4 pictures on the screen, and they are asked to find the picture that matches that word, the word that they hear. Now, this task, again, assesses the extent of their vocabulary knowledge, and I've found that children tend to enjoy this part of the assessment in particular. Depending on the age and the abilities of the child, you can sort of let them tap the screen themselves, which they always enjoy. Kids love work on tablets. So that's an option for you if that's suitable for the child that you're working with. And then the last subtest is sentence repetition. And in this task, children hear a series of sentences and they are asked to repeat each one exactly as they hear it. So this task assesses their understanding of sentence structure and their ability to produce grammatically correct sentences. And I should say, and because I get this question a lot from practitioners, is it's not a test of speech sound production problems. So for example, if a child always pronounces an R sound as a W, as a W sound, then that wouldn't be marked as incorrect. That's not what we're testing for here. We're just really looking for where a word is missed out or moved or replaced entirely or pronounced incorrectly in a way that isn't consistent with kind of a child's typical speech pattern. Okay, so that's the assessment itself. So now let's have a look at the report. So as soon as an assessment is completed, it can be uploaded to the OXED system and you can generate a report. And when you generate a report, you'll see three main sections. The first one is a kind of explanatory information section that will help you to understand what's been tested in that LanguageScreen assessment and also help you to understand the information that's contained in the report. Then there's a results summary table, and then there's individual results pages. So the results summary table is a table of all of the children that you've assessed, ranked from lowest to highest standard score. And the reason we do it this way is that you can see the children who would benefit most from having some targeted intervention first. They're the first ones you see on that report. There are corresponding traffic light symbols, which make it even easier to spot those children as well. And I should say that the example that we've got on the screen here is very, very neat and tidy. There's 3 reds, 3 ambers, and the rest are green. But of course, your class or year group profile might look very different from this one. We know that language needs are on the rise, so you very well might have a class where lots of the children are red and amber, but you might also be at the other end of the spectrum where you have really strong language skills, lots of greens and only a couple of reds and ambers. That's absolutely fine. We would always still give the same advice. So we recommend allocating, if you are delivering an intervention like NELI, that you allocate the sort of 4 to 6 children with the lowest standard scores, even if they're green, especially in the early years, it will still absolutely be beneficial to them to receive that additional targeted support. So don't rule them out. It's just that we've put that traffic light system in place to kind of help you prioritize if you have more children with language needs than you have capacity to deliver groups. And I should say that if you're assessing a class in which you will be delivering NELI, then we strongly encourage you to record which children you decide to deliver to, so that you can more quickly spot them at the end of the year when your rankings may well have changed, and also so that you have a kind of lasting record of where you have invested additional teaching. It really might be interesting to track those children's progress as they move up through the school. And actually, I think Matthew's going to mention a little bit about that a little bit later. All right. So then underneath that kind of results summary table, you'll find the individual results pages. And these contain a more detailed profile for each child. And they're suitable for sharing with, if you want to as well, with parents or external specialists and so on. So on the slide here, I have highlighted the scores at the top, just to show you that that's where they are. A score is provided for each individual subtest as well as the overall test. And the scores are provided both as raw scores, which is the figure that's in the bracket, and as standard scores. But as I mentioned earlier, standard scores is the one that you really want to look at. That's the one that's giving you the most accurate understanding of that child's language abilities. Okay, so in terms of using LanguageScreen to kind of measure and monitor your children's progress. So if a child has been assessed more than once within the time period that you've specified when you've generated a report, you will see those assessments next to each other with the most recent assessment at the top. So hopefully this will allow you to kind of really quickly see any progress that has been made by that child. And just to kind of help you understand a little bit more about kind of standard scores and how to use them to understand changes in language abilities. An increase in a child's LanguageScreen score shows that their language skills have improved relative to other children of the same age. So it's a real terms improvement, that they've improved beyond what you would expect them to improve just by kind of getting older. In contrast, a decrease in a child's LanguageScreen score shows that their language skills are actually failing to develop at the expected rate. They're failing to keep up with the improvements that you would expect to see from them just getting older. And if a score doesn't change, it means that their language skills are improving at pretty much about the rate that we would expect. So as a rough guide, a change in standard score of 5 points or more indicates that there has been a meaningful change in their language skills. So that's the sort of change that we would be expecting to see or hoping to see if we have delivered some kind of targeted intervention like NELI or anything else to kind of improve those children's scores and kind of help them catch up and help them improve quicker than we would expect them to just by getting older. And we're really pleased to say that we will be releasing some enhanced reporting to help you track group progress. We'll be releasing this later this school year. Likely it'll be after the Easter holidays, but in time for you to do your kind of end of year assessments. And we really look forward to being able to tell you more about this in coming months. Okay, so if you are delivering NELI, for those of you who are, LanguageScreen will be just one way that you can measure children's progress. There are a range of paper assessments provided with the programme as well that can help you to track the children's their narrative skills, their letter sound knowledge, and also their behaviour. So narrative assessments in particular can provide some really helpful context to the data that you'll be gathering with LanguageScreen. And we've heard from practitioners that they like to share, that they often like to share the stories that children tell as part of these assessments to kind of help wider staff and senior leaders to kind of better understand the range of language abilities that they're dealing with, and also to illustrate what these language skills, these different language skills, and also these improvements in language skills look like in sort of the context of real world classroom activities. So just to illustrate this, Matthew very kindly agreed for me to share some narrative data that was collected from some of the reception, the new incoming reception cohort this year that were also assessed with LanguageScreen. Now each child was retelling the same story, the gingerbread man, and the practitioner wrote down their story verbatim. So you can very quickly see the sort of the differences in the length and the vocabulary and the complexity of each story as we go from the two children on the far left who have very, very low LanguageScreen scores of 65, moving up to the kind of slightly better but still very low score of 75, and then that amber score of 85 and that green score of 94. So perhaps, Matthew, if you could just say a few words about how you found kind of sharing these narratives helpful alongside the children's LanguageScreen scores.
Yep, so this was after a week of working in NELI. We decided to record the children's narratives, as Sarah said, and we shared it with parents so the parents could know what they were working on in those NELI sessions. But when we, as practitioners, saw the difference in the kind of standard there, we then thought it was actually quite good to take it to the wider school community. So we took it to our governors to show them the impact that the NELI programme was having But we also then showed it with wider school staff. So we are in an early years building at the back of our school site. We're sometimes kind of forgotten about a little bit because we're not in the main school building. We thought it'd be useful to show particularly year 5 and 6 teachers, and when they saw the narratives, it just put into context the level at which the children are entering reception. In 7 years' time, they'll be doing their SATs, but this is where the children are starting. And it really helped our year 5 and 6 teachers to just really contextualize it, because a standardized score, we can say it's low, but actually when you put it in that context of a child's narrative, it makes that really clear.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's incredibly helpful, and I'd strongly recommend that you guys have a go at doing this, because it's really interesting to see, I think, how those scores map onto the storytelling abilities. Okay, so just quickly before I we have our Q&A, Matthew, I will just mention how to get started with the language screen, and I really will whiz through this because we did see that most people had used it before. And also all of this information is online, so if you go to oxfordanassessment.com, there's lots of support for helping you sort of get ready with language screen. All pupil data is stored and managed via Oxed's portal on oxfordanassessment.com. This means that the data is really secure. It means that there's no personally identifiable information ever stored on assessment devices. So that's why everything is kind of managed there. So the first step is always to kind of either create a school account or sign into your existing account via the Oxed portal. Then you create a class and you upload pupil data. You can use our template if you would like to make it quicker. And then you use that data to generate unique QR codes for each of those children that you're planning to assess. And then that's it. You're ready. You're ready to start assessing. And you just need to open the app, scan the QR code for the child that you're about to assess, and off you go. And just one thing I wanted to note there is that the person who carries out the assessment doesn't have to be the person that uploads the data or generates the reports. They don't actually even need to have access to the Oxed account, as long as they can be provided with a printout of the QR code. So hopefully that offers you a bit of flexibility in terms of who is able to go and do those assessments. Okay, so all right, so I'm very happy to have Matthew on the panel here today. And Matthew, I thought we could start maybe just, if you wouldn't mind, introducing a little bit more about your school, St. Michael's.
Yep, so as it says there, we are an inner city primary school in Oxford. There are 3 other primary schools within our town. We're a one-form entry school with a nursery, so we've got approximately about 210 pupils. We have quite a mixed catchment area. We have lots of families coming here to study academically, and then they move off before the 7 years that they're here in primary. So children come and go quite a bit. And we've got about 30% of our children coming with varying levels of English as additional language. Some children will come into school at different points with little to no English. Others will come with a good understanding, but are still marked as EAL. And we've got 11% of our children on the SEN register.
Fantastic. And how long have you been using LanguageScreen, and how do you tend to use it? So what year groups do you assess in, which children do you assess, and so on?
So we've been using LanguageScreen for about 4 or 5 years now. I think it's been 4 full years, and we're now in our 5th year of using it. It's primarily used in reception. We're a one-form entry intake, so we screen all of the reception children upon entry. We do the government baseline assessment, and then soon after that, we then move on to the NELI assessments, LanguageScreen, and it really doesn't take much time at all. You were talking about when you go into schools, it takes you about a day. For us, it's less than a week, and they're done. And it's not that we don't do anything else. We are still doing our day-to-day routines, our day-to-day kind of activities, and LanguageScreen assessments just fit really neatly with those. We use LanguageScreen as a tool to identify the children that we would like to do for our NELI intervention. We do the NELI intervention. But what we found this year more so is that actually LanguageScreen has helped us identify children that we didn't necessarily anticipate would have been flagged on that system, and they can articulate, they can have conversations with us, they communicate and express their ideas. But actually, what the language screen report showed us is one of those strands the child wasn't as confident on, and that allowed us to target children in particular. As I say, we normally use it in reception, but we're now this academic year thinking about using language screen across particularly Key Stage 2, where we have children coming in to the school with very poor language. We would like a tool to know that the interventions that we're putting in place for those children coming into year 5 and 6, for example, are having an impact. And language screen will be able to do that for us through the use of standardized scores.
Fantastic. Brilliant to hear that you're planning on sort of extending out beyond the typical use, I suppose, which is obviously in reception. And are you using any other language assessments alongside language screen at all?
We just felt that there was no need. There were other ones that were kind of being discussed before, where we merged with our nursery provider. The nursery was using something slightly different. We just feel that actually language screen is so comprehensive, it gives us everything we need to know, and therefore we don't need to use anything else.
Fantastic. Well, that's great to hear, obviously, music to our ears, that it kind of does everything that you feel like you need it to. So you said in reception you're kind of using it alongside your NELI delivery as part of that kind of NELI program delivery structure. So could you tell us a little bit more about your NELI delivery pattern?
Of course, so NELI is normally run with reception, and we normally have one group of about 4 to 6 reception children doing that over the last 4 years of doing it. There have been 1 year where we had a child from year 1 and a child from year 2 join that group just because they entered the school with very poor language, but it is traditionally one group of reception children. Now, this year is a bit of an anomaly for us because we did the language screen, and it was something like 52% of our cohort was identified as having emerging or more severe language delay. So what that meant is we needed to make more than one NELI group happen. So we're running 2 NELI groups this year, which is unusual for us because that has obviously a knock-on impact in terms of timetabling. But 2 groups this year is what we're going with.
Okay, that's really interesting to hear. We know from speaking to schools that staffing resource can often be a really sort of tricky hurdle for schools who want to implement some kind of language intervention, be that NELI or something else, or for schools who are already doing something but want to expand to more children in the way that you have. So I'd be interested in hearing about how language screen and the data that it provides sort of contributed to that decision and the kind of impact that it's had.
So, I mean, language screen has just revolutionized the way in which we can identify the children who need these concerns. I mean, we thought we kind of know our children quite well at the beginning of the academic year, but actually, like I said, there were certain children that had gaps that we didn't necessarily identify. So language screen enables us to really clearly identify all the children we want to be supporting, but also the fact that language screen doesn't put more onus on us as practitioners to then go and mark it. As you were saying, it automatically calculates those scores. You can pull off the report once you've screened all the children, and it just saves practitioner time. So that in itself was factoring in our decision to use language screen because it was practitioner friendly in that respect. We moved our phonics teaching to prioritize NELI. So normally we would be doing NELI in the afternoons, and focusing on our phonics and our maths teaching in the morning. But once this cohort we've got now in our reception class, there's no point of teaching children how to learn to read or write if they can't speak properly. So that's why we're moving our timetable around to have 2 NELI groups in the morning, and it's one teaching assistant who's doing both groups. So I lose her out of the classroom for double the amount of time, but at the moment that's the priority because we've done NELI now for 4 full years. The impact is huge, and it's improving and improving the more that we're becoming confident in using the language screen and NELI program. But we wouldn't change it because why teach a child to read if they can't learn to speak?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's brilliant to hear you kind of saying that. And we'll be looking at some of your data in a moment about the impact that you've seen from that NELI delivery. But yeah, it's interesting because we'll see it in a moment. But there was quite a jump in the amount of standard score increase last year compared to previous years. I mean, in previous years it was already fantastic, but last year it was incredible. So I wonder whether the moving around of the timetable helped, and it's just a really interesting lesson to kind of show that once you've started on your NELI delivery, it doesn't mean that it has to be done in the same way for the end of time. You might see that there are ways that you can kind of move things around to kind of suit the children better, and also obviously to sort of redirect some of that TA resource in the way that you have done. So let's just take a step back for a moment. Why did you decide to start using LanguageScreen and NELI in the first place?
So there was part of a research trial that was looking at the effectiveness of it, and we felt that it was really important to kind of engage with research from different sources. I think that was the Educational Endowment Foundation was kind of supporting that study at the time, and we felt that actually it was important to not just pick up a passing fad. Is what we're doing useful? So it was a research trial that introduced us to both language screening and NELI. It was during the height of the COVID pandemic, so we had disruption during lockdowns and things. But even despite of that disruption, the language score, standardized score, the progress that the children made was substantial. So then it just made sense for us to carry on using it.
That's fantastic, and it's really great to hear you talking about sort of being a research-driven school. Where did that come from? Why is that so important to you guys?
I think it filters down from our senior leadership team. So I'm currently the acting deputy, the deputy head that's on maternity leave at the moment, and our head teacher. They are both very, very research-driven practitioners. School budgets at the moment are tight. We don't have excessive amounts of money to just throw at schemes of work or intervention programs just willy-nilly. We have to make sure that what we're doing hopefully will have an impact on the children, and therefore if it's the cost or the time or the resource element, that it will have impact. So I think, yeah, because our senior leadership team are aware of that, that's kind of what led us to it.
Brilliant. And so you took part in that initial research trial and you kind of started to see some positive effects. What contributed to your decision to kind of continue to use LanguageScreen and NELI beyond the research trial then?
I think for us, it was the fact that the results were just so clear. We could really clearly identify which children had improved through that NELI program. We'd also screen some other children as part of like a mini control group, the next 5 or so children who didn't take part in the NELI intervention. We screen them again after the 20 weeks to then compare their scores. And when you see that the children who are involved in NELI, the gap is closing between them and their kind of peers, well, actually, that's what our job is about, is trying to close that gap. And the fact that there's a gap there at the age of 4 and 5 is really sad, but it's what can we do to change that? So by seeing the impact that we were having in NELI, it just made sense to carry on using it.
Fantastic. And yeah, I'll bring up some data now to kind of illustrate that point. I didn't want to share it while you're talking as a distraction, but it essentially still illustrates exactly what you were just saying. That at the top here, in the kind of with the black text, child A to E received NELI. This is the data from last year. And the sort of average change in standard score for those children was plus 24. So if I just go back to what I said earlier about a meaningful change being 5 points, I mean, an increase in 24 is absolutely incredible. And that's in comparison to the children, so child F to I in blue underneath, and their average change in standard score was plus 2. So they essentially stayed static. They kind of kept up with the level of progress that you would expect them to make over the course of that time. But that sort of increase of 24 is just phenomenal, and a real sort of credit to your team for kind of putting that delivery in place.
Absolutely. And it's just to say that child E there doesn't have a standardized score for either standard pre-assessment or post-assessment, not because they couldn't engage with the assessment at all. There was nothing as to that. It was just the fact that they'd started after the NELI program they joined our school after the NELI program started. They then left the school before the NELI program had finished because they relocated out of the country. So that was just why it's non-applicable for child E. But yeah, like you say, the schools every year that our progress scores for the children have been increasing and increasing and increasing. And I think when you look at it, that's just kind of what makes us think that's why we're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for flagging that. And also, I wanted to say it's great to see 3 children in there with English as an additional language. I know you said that you've got kind of quite a high proportion of children with EAL in your school. NELI is absolutely suitable for children with EAL. So it's really fantastic to see that that they're being supported there at your school. Okay, so then how has LanguageScreen sort of data and the access to LanguageScreen supported your practice in other ways?
I mean, it's given us the idea about the importance of communication and language diet. We need to really make sure that that's a primary of the curriculum in EYFS, and actually it's important. It makes all staff just raise their expectation and have the highest expectations, even for those children who are not involved in the NELI group. It's thinking about what can we be doing to build all of the children's cohort. This intervention group is great for the children that are taking part, but it really just raises our expectations. It also allows us to track back on previous year groups and see what the children are entering the setting. Are they coming into our school with lower scores, lower entry points? Is that a trend that we're seeing, which is what we are seeing, highlighted in that table? But it also allows us to then track, if they were part of the NELI group in reception, are they going on to year 1 and meeting age-related expectations? Are they going into year 2 and meeting age-related expectations? Or is there that kind of not sustained impact later on as they go through the year? The impact that we're seeing in reception is great, but what we're seeing is it is carrying forward through the years, which is really what we want.
That's yeah, that's really interesting, and it's sort of creating this kind of rich tapestry of history that you have about your kind of cohorts that are coming in. And I suppose it does also link into what you said earlier about you wanting to kind of extend your LanguageScreen assessments out into later years. It's kind of really building up that rich understanding of children's language abilities, both historical, present, and kind of into the future as well.
Yeah. And it's the standardized score is just really clear. I mean, we're all about kind of measuring impact. Our Senko looks at our provision maps, looks at our pupil profiles. So for those children who are thinking about assessing in year 5, they won't be taking part in the NELI program, but they'll be screened in LanguageScreen. So what we'll be able to then say at the beginning of autumn, this was their standardized score. These other interventions were put in place for this key stage 2 child. Screen them again later, and it just gives you so much use and opportunity, even as a LanguageScreen tool itself.
Mhm, mhm. Fantastic. All right. Well, I feel like we could talk for longer, but we are already overrunning, and that's totally my fault. So I'm sorry to everyone for keeping you late. But just thank you so much again, Matthew, for coming on today. It was really lovely to hear your experiences. Oh, I should move on to my next slide. And thank you everyone for attending. Hope you found the content useful. As always, look out for our future webinars. Please get in touch if there's anything that you would like me to cover in future webinars. If you would like any support with getting up and running with your LanguageScreen or your NELI program as a whole, the QR code on the slide there will allow you to book a call in with our support team. And of course, you can always contact us on social media or email. And all the usual ways. So yeah, just one more last thank you to Matthew, and thank you to everyone else for coming along today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.